Hello everybody and welcome to today's edition of Daf Yomi. Hope everything is good at your end. So let's dive straight in. Rav Papa said to the rabbis, if the rabbis derived liability for one who takes a false oath of testimony on his own by means of a murmur and from an oath on a deposit, then everyone agrees and infer from it and derive the details from it, and even the rabbis will concede that all of the halachot of the oath of testimony derived from the oath on a deposit. Therefore, one is liable for an oath taken on one's own even outside the court. Rather, this is the reason that the rabbis hold that there is no liability for the oath of testimony taken on one's own outside the court. The variable meaning of fortiori inference from the halachot of the oath of testimony itself as follows: and if one who was administered an oath by others is liable, when one takes an oath on his own, is he not all the more so liable? And from the fact that they derive the halacha by means of an fortiori inference, one is bound by the limitations that restrict that derivation. It is sufficient for the conclusion that emerges from an fortiori inference to be like its source. So what does that mean? min hadin nidon. This halacha principle referred to in short as dayo restricts the conclusion that may be derived from an fortiori inference, and prevents establishing limitless leniencies or stringencies from the fortiori inference by creating parameters for its implementation. Dayo is an extension of another principle. If you grasp the maximum, you do not grasp the proper interpretation. If you grasp the minimum, you do not grasp the proper interpretation. The principle of Dayo establishes that one derives a fortiori inference in the following manner: just as X is more stringent than Y with regard to point A, X is now as stringent than Y with regard to point B. One does not derive, just as X is more stringent than Y with regard to point A, X is similarly more stringent than Y with regard to point B. If that were the case, there would be no limit to the conclusion derived from the inference. Therefore, just as one who is administered an oath by others, if the oath is administered in court, yes, he is liable, and if it is not administered in court, no, he is not liable. So too, one who took the oath on his own before a court, yes, he's liable, and if it is not before a court, no, he's not liable. And the rabbis say to Rav Papa, how can you say that it is not with regard to the matter of infer from it and derive the details from it that they disagree? But didn't we learn in the Mishnah with regard to the oath on a deposit? The oath on a deposit is practiced with regard to men and with regard to women, with regard to non-relatives and with regard to relatives, with regard to those fit to testify and with regard to those unfit to testify. The oath on a deposit is practiced both in the presence of the court and not in the presence of the court. When the bailey takes the oath on his own, and if the oath is administered by others, he is not liable until he denies responsibility for the deposit in court. This is a statement of Rabbi Meir. And the rabbis say, whether the bailey takes the oath on his own, or whether the oath is administered by others, once he denied the claim concerning the deposit, he is liable. The question arises, from where did the rabbis derive that one who administered an oath on a deposit by others is liable, given that the oath of that kind is not mentioned in the Torah in the context of an oath on a deposit? Is it not that they derive it from the halachot of the oath of testimony? Lav de gamri lo me'edus. The halacha of an oath on a deposit is stated in the Torah only in a case where one denies the claim himself, and not when the oath is administered by others. This can also not be derived as a fortiori, as on the contrary, liability in a case where one has an oath administered by others is less obvious than liability in a case where one takes an oath himself, says Rashi. Rather, it must be that it was derived by means of an analogy from the oath of testimony. And even Rabbi Meir derives the halacha in that manner. The rabbi derived from the oath of testimony only that there is liability for one who has an oath administered by others, but they did not derive that the halacha of the oath on a deposit will be identical to the halacha of oath of testimony to the extent that there is liability only if the oath is taken in court. Rather, in their opinion, halachot derived with regard to the oath on the deposit are placed within the framework of the halachot of the oath deposit. Therefore, one is liable for taking a false oath outside of court, denying the claim. And conclude from it that it is with regard to the matter of infer from it and derive the details from it that they disagree. The rabbis hold, infer the halacha from it, interpret the halacha according to its own place. The fact that one is liable for an oath on a deposit that is administered by others is derived from the oath of testimony, but one does not derive that one is liable only if that oath is administered in the presence of a court. Rather, the oath on a deposit administered by others is derived from an oath on a deposit taken one's own. One is liable in both cases for an oath not taken in the presence of the court. Rav Papa says to the rabbis, from that Mishnah, yes, it is evident that the rabbis and Rabbi Meir disagree with regard to the matter of inferring from it and derive from the details from it. However, no inference is to be learned from this Mishnah with regard to the oath of testimony, as perhaps the rabbis derived their opinion by means of a fortiori inference. The Mishnah teaches that one is liable for the act of taking a false oath with intent. You want to ask, from where is this matter derived that one is liable to bring a sliding scale offering for taking a false oath of testimony with intent? It is derived as the sages taught in all the other cases where one is liable to bring a sliding scale offering. See Leviticus 5:2-4, i.e., the defiling of the temple of sacrificial food and violating an oath on an utterance. It is stated and it is hidden. But here with regard to the oath of testimony, it is not stated and it is hidden, which serves to render one liable for taking the oath intentionally, just as he is liable for taking the oath unwittingly. The Chayev al Hamazin Keshogeg, witnesses who have knowledge of a matter that is relevant to testimony and take an oath denying that knowledge are liable to bring a sliding scale offering, whether they took the oath intentionally or unwittingly. Shevuot 1:12. It's teaches that one is liable for an unwitting act of taking the false testimony, provided that he takes the oath with intent in terms of testimony. The Gemara asks, and what are the circumstances in a case of an unwitting act of taking a false oath with intent in terms of the testimony? Rav Yehuda says that Rav says that this is the case of one who says, I know that taking this false oath, what is an unwitting oath of testimony? It is a case where one knows information relevant to testimony in a certain case, and he takes a false oath to the effect that he has no knowledge of the matter, and he is aware that taking a false oath is prohibited, but he is not aware that taking the false oath renders him liable to an offering. If he is not aware that it is prohibited to take a false oath, or if he took the oath, he forgot the matter, and later he recalled it, was reminded that he knew testimony relevant to the matter, that is a false oath taken due to circumstances beyond his control, and he is exempt from liability to bring an offering. Shevuot 1:13. That I do not know that the relevant information is prohibited, but I do not know whether or not one is liable to an offering for taking that oath. The Mishnah teaches, but they are not liable for taking the oath if they were unwitting in terms of testimony alone. If one actually forgot that he knows about the matter, he is exempt from bringing an offering. The Gemara asks, shall we say that we learn in the Mishnah? Lema Tanena. This is difficult. If the matter is unclear from the Mishnah, why were Rav Kahana and Rav Ashi uncertain whether they had taken a false oath? Some explain that apparently it is not that clear, as if it were, why was it necessary for Rav to inform them that they are not guilty of taking an unwitting oath on an utterance? That was Rav said in response to the dispute of Rav Kahana and Rav Ashi. The Gemara 26a cited a dispute between Rav Kahana and Rav Ashi with regard to a certain statement of Rav, and each took an oath that his version was accurate. Rav told them that although the version of one of the Amoraim was not accurate, he is not liable for taking a false oath, as each Amorah was convinced that this oath was true. This is not an unwitting oath, rather it is an oath taken unaware. The Gemara responds, no. Even though we learn this halacha in the Mishnah, Rav's statement that the one who did not cite Rav's statement actually is exempt what was necessary. It may enter your mind to say, it is only here with regard to the oath, to taking a false oath, as it is hidden, and this is hidden, it is not written concerning it. Indicate that in order to be liable, we require that the halachic status of the unwitting oath is similar to that of an intentional oath, i.e. he knows that he's been taking a false oath, but he does not know that he is liable to bring an offering for doing so. Therefore, one who is unaware that it's a false oath is exempt. But then in the case of Kahana and Rashi, where each took an oath on an utterance where it is written and it is hidden, even if it's entirely unwitting, i.e. they were totally unaware that the oath was false, one might say that he is liable. Therefore, Rav teaches us that even in the case of an oath on an utterance, one who is unwitting to that extent is exempt. Liability to bring a sliding scale offering for taking a false oath of testimony. How so? What are the circumstances of the oath of testimony? If witnesses know testimony relevant to a case involving monetary matters, the plaintiff administers an oath to them to testify on his behalf that they deny knowledge of that matter, and they take an oath to that effect. That is the oath of testimony. Shevuot 1:12. In a case where the plaintiff said to two individuals, "Come and testify on my behalf," and they replied, "On our oath, we do not know any testimony on your behalf," i.e., we do not have any knowledge of the matter that you speak of. Or in a case where they said to him, "We do not know any testimony on your behalf," and he said to them, "I administer an oath to you." The Rid writes that fundamentally, the plaintiff does not have the authority to administer an oath to the witnesses, and it is their prerogative whether to testify and in what manner to do so. Therefore, when he administers an oath to them, he can refuse to take the oath. The case here is one where they agree to take the oath themselves, or where he administered an oath to them, so they accepted the oath. And they said, Amen. If it was determined that they lied, these two witnesses are liable. If he administered an oath to them 5 times outside the court, Shevuot Edus case, Hasbia Aleihen Chamesh Pa'amim. If one administers an oath to witnesses in court and they deny knowledge of the matter, and he administers additional oath in court or outside the court, even if they answer Amen to each oath, or if they personally take additional oaths, they are liable to bring only one offering for a false oath of testimony. The reason is that once they deny knowledge of the matter, even if they were to recant and admit their knowledge of the matter would be inadmissible. This is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Nevertheless, although they are exempt from liability for taking a false oath of testimony, they are liable for taking a false oath on an utterance for each and every oath. 10:18-19 before the court, and they denied knowledge of the incident, they are liable for taking only one false oath. Rabbi Shimon said, what is the reason for this ruling? Since they denied that they had any knowledge of the incident, they can no longer retract that denial and admit. There's a principle of God's testimony in court. Once a witness states his testimony, he may not state a revision or any modified testimony is inadmissible. That they have knowledge of the matter. Therefore, there was only one oath of testimony, and there is no liability for the remaining oaths. If both of the witnesses deny knowledge of the incident together, with regard to one who administers an oath to two witnesses in court, and both deny knowledge of the incident simultaneously, i.e., if the second witness begins his denial within the time required for speaking a short phrase after the first concludes his denial, each is liable for taking a false oath of testimony. If the second witness begins his denial after a long interval elapsed from the conclusion of the denial of the first witness is liable for taking a false oath of testimony. The second witness is exempt, but even if he were to admit that he knew testimony relevant to the incident, that testimony would not be sufficient to render the defendant liable to pay. And Shevuot 10:13, both of them are liable. If they deny knowledge one after the other, the first who denied knowledge is liable, and the second is exempt. As the first witness denies knowledge of the incident, the second is an individual witness whose testimony is not decisive. If one of the two witnesses denied knowledge of the incident, and the other one admitted that he had knowledge and proceeded to testify, the one who denies knowledge of the incident is liable. If there were two sets of witnesses that took the oath of testimony, and the first set denied, in a case where one administered an oath to two pairs of witnesses and are both fit to testimony, if the first pair denied knowledge of the matter, and then the second set denied knowledge of the matter, the first group is exempt from liability for taking a false oath of testimony, and they rely on the testimony of the second pair, and the plaintiff will be able to collect the debt based on testimony of that second pair. Therefore, the defendant is not liable to pay based on the testimony of the first pair and the knowledge of that testimony. Now, so the Rambam Sefer Shevuot 10:15, knowledge of the matter, and then the second set denied knowledge of the matter. Both of the sets are liable because the testimony can exist with either of them, as even the first set denies knowledge of the incident, the second set remains capable of providing decisive testimony. Shmuel says, if the witnesses saw the plaintiff pursuing them, witnesses are liable for taking a false oath of testimony only if they deny knowledge of the incident in question and take an oath after the plaintiff or his agent demand that they testify. How so? If they saw the plaintiff pursuing them and say to him, "Why are you pursuing us?" we take an oath that we have no knowledge of the matter on your behalf, they are exempt from liability for taking a false oath of testimony because the plaintiff did not demand the testimony, and they took the oath at their own initiative. And say for Shevuot 9:7. And they said to him, "For what reason are you pursuing us? On our oath we did not hear any testimony on your behalf." They are exempt until we will hear a demand to testify directly from his mouth. The Gemara asks, "What is Shmuel teaching us?" We learn this in a Mishnah in 35a. If the plaintiff sent a request for testimony with a servant, or if the respondent said to the potential witness, "I administer an oath to you," and if you know any testimony on the behalf of the plaintiff, she'im atem yodim lo eidus. If the defendant administered an oath to witnesses that they know testimony on behalf of the plaintiff, they will testify on his behalf. They are exempt from liability for taking a false oath of testimony, as they are liable only if the plaintiff demands their testimony. It goes without saying that if one administers an oath to witnesses that they will testify on behalf of the second individual with regard to his claim against the third individual, and they take a false oath, they are exempt, as in that case the one demanding the oath is not a litigant at all. Shevuot 9:7. My opponent in the litigation will come and testify on his behalf, and they took a false oath that they have no knowledge of the incident. They are exempt until they hear demand to testify directly from the mouth of the plaintiff. Thank you for listening, and wish you all the best. Bye.